because of APIs and the proliferation of APIs, now there's an API for everything. And so now companies have understood that their end user is not always a developer. Their end user is probably a business people.
From Toro Cloud, this is the Coding Over Cocktails podcast, a free pour of thoughts and ideas from IT experts, thought leaders, and authors, sharing their insights and advice for individuals architecting solutions for the ever-changing landscape of enterprise tech, digital transformation, and more. Welcome to episode 72 of the Coding Over Cocktails podcast. My name is Kevin Montalvo. In this episode, we have a returning guest who is an entrepreneur, author, and investor in the software and the API industry. He founded the popular APIDays conferences in 2012, the main series of conferences on APIs and data portability. He is now the co-founder of ALIAS, a data protection API engine, and was the co-founder of the API identity portability platform OAuth.io, acquired in 2017. He also has several books and reports under his name, which include Continuous API Management, Regulating Big Tech, and The State of the API Industry Landscape 2022 report, which we'll be talking about today. Joining us for his second round of cocktails is Mehdi Medjaoui. Hi, Mehdi. Welcome once again.
Hi, Kevin. Thank you for having me a second time. Yeah, thank you very much.
Right. So now, before we begin, we'd like to remind our viewers, because we're on YouTube, and listeners, that you can dive deep into today's episode by visiting our page, torocloud.com/podcast, where we'll have a full transcript of this podcast episode, show notes, as well as links to resources to be mentioned in the show. You can also download our iPass Martini for free. Martini is Toro Cloud's integration platform without limits. Take charge of your business using a single solution to manage all of your data across applications, databases, and business processes. Try it out and discover why it's the highest rated iPass on G2. Visit torocloud.com/martini to learn more. All right, so Mehdi, the last time you were here, we talked about enabling GDPR compliance, but today we're going to talk about APIs. Now, before we dive into your findings and the trends that you observed from your report this year, can you give us an overview of what the API Industry Landscape Report is and how you started creating this categorization of API tools, providers, and companies?
Yeah, thank you. So the API industry landscape is a map. Many investors love to publish these maps, like the cloud landscape or the AI landscape, and these maps try to give an overview about like how the industry is organizing, how it's structuring, like what are the different value chains and who are the different providers along the value chain. So we wanted to do one APIs, but we said, okay, let's not do one which is really static. Let's go with one that is highly interactive, that where you can search, you can browse, you can click, you can explore, you can consult a lot more data. So yeah, this is why with Mark Boyd, who is an API journalist and a data analyst at Platformable, we decided to make an API industry landscape to explain to decision makers how the API market is structured. Where is the value? What's the value chain, and who are the vendors who are populating the value? But also make it in an interactive way where people can find a company, click to know more, to have more data, and not do it like a classic VC landscape, which is really static. It just follows because they invest in tech, but they don't use tech, right?
Yeah, and our listeners would be interested in that, and they can find the link of your API Industry Landscape Report in this podcast. Speaking of listeners, most of them, they're software architects, and they would be interested in the findings, in the trends that you found in your report. So we're going to dive deep into those today. So first and foremost, in your report, you found that there has been an explosion of regulations governing the API industry. So how do you see this impacting the way API tool providers work?
Yes, it's true. So just to sum up, like today we gathered 1,100 tools, API tools in the landscape. Right, we took the major one, or the one who are kind of, we consider mature. Even some are completely open source, but we consider them mature to be part of the landscape. It represents a total of $180 billion of investment, so it's quite big. Yes, and it's true that let's say regulation have highly impacted the API industry landscape, especially the one who started in 2013. Right, in 2013 we had two types of regulation happening at the same time. We have like some open data regulations. Like I remember Barack Obama in the US say every public agency must have an API by the end of the year. Because of this open data movement, like public sector wanted to publish data openly to third parties. And when they understood that Excel files or CSV files were not the best for building applications, they decided, okay, we need to do it with API. So it was a regulation for the public sector. And in the same time, it started mainly in Europe for this one. But yeah, we had open banking regulations, so PSD2, Payment Service Directive 2, who pushed and obliged banks to open APIs for account information or payment initiation. And they had 5 years to do so. But when we've seen the regulation, let's say many investors and many entrepreneurs say, oh my God, like banks will open APIs, like, so the data from banks will be open. Oh, we need to invest there. And so all the fintech movement has been highly accelerated by this obligation to open APIs. So many tools are enabled because of regulation pushing for APIs as a way to answer a regulation. But we've seen also in Brazil recently an insurance regulation about APIs. We've seen sometimes in Europe like logistics and supply chain APIs, and also healthcare. There is a famous standard called FHIR, right? And the FHIR APIs, let's say, are now an obligation to share data between hospitals or medtech application or whatever via this standardized API. So all these, let's say, regulation-driven markets are pushing APIs in as an obligation to use them, and many vendors are actually having specific product about it or are dedicated to these industries. You can take an example like Yapily, or it's an open banking platform, API management platform for open banking. They just do open banking, right? It enabled this new generation of tools. So so the landscape is quite affected by these regulations.
Yeah, and it's interesting to note that despite the fact that when we say regulations, it usually is a roadblock. But in this case, it's opening up more companies to even embrace the APIs, the use of APIs, API tooling, and become part of the API ecosystem. Is that right?
Yeah, regulation. Our offenses like roadblocks, but these regulations were here to open and to share value. I just take the example of open banking. The goal was to say, look, banks, your business model is to capture customers for 20 years or 30 years in a mortgage. And so you don't have to innovate, right? So the customers, the customer behind the citizen, right, is not benefiting from all the money banks are making and from innovation. So we will oblige banks to open, to let third party innovate instead of banks. Banks, you should have innovated the last 30 years. So it was this is a type of regulation that tried to redistribute value on the market, like to shuffle the cards, right? To reshuffle the cards. So this type of regulation is opening new stuff, right? But again, you can have a regulation that obliges you to build tools. It doesn't mean it's a good regulation. For example, if a regulation obliges you to respect certain process or scenario, and many startups will build company just out of that, doesn't mean it's a good regulation that generates value if it's a blocker. But this one, it was not the blocker. It was an enabler, because actually the fintech market has exploded and is now fintech plus banking is a lot bigger than banking alone 10 years ago. So it was really value generating for everyone, this type of regulations.
Yeah, sounds great. Now, I want to jump into your second finding. API security obviously is part of API management, but your report in the second trend, it states that API security has become a standalone product with privacy next in line. So let's focus first on the API security aspect. Why do you think this happened? Why is Why has API security become a standalone product?
So there are two reasons why API security is a standalone product. The first one is like the commoditization of API management. So we take it as a trend zero in our report. Let's say API management has been there for 15 years, many acquisitions. We show the number of acquisitions in the report. So there is a lot of consolidation into big players. So every cloud vendor has their own API management solution. So let's say the innovation has stopped a little bit. And also there is a lot of commoditization. So we've seen also players investing in open source API management like Kong, Gravity, Tyke, Solo. WSO2 was there for a long time, but they were also open source. So now we have a good open source stack that in open source liberate the value. I will not say kill the value, but liberate the value on the core. So now classic API management tools are free of charge if you know how to manage them with open source. So the market needed also to reinvest into making capturing again more value. Then we had the regulation. So we've seen many specialization into regulation, like we said just earlier. So many solutions dedicated to banking, healthcare, logistics, supply chain, insurance. But now there's another aspect, which is specializing into the tech part of API management, and API security is definitely one for different reasons. First, the COVID has obliged many companies to go like remote and open endpoints that was sometimes not managed or stuff like that. So they're really, the attack surface has increased a lot in urgency. So let's say a lot of companies are not aware, and because it was not managed, they want a solution that helps them to make a shield, right? And also the complexity of attacks, like now cybersecurity, cyber threat, ransom threats are kind of a new, not so new, but like there is a new trend because of these weak endpoints or these weak access, and so now company needs to raise the bar into API security. So this is why we have seen pure API security players over the last years, and we've seen really an arms security race. Last year, if you take company like Traceable, No Name Security, Whip Security, 42 Crunch, Salt Security, like these 5 startups raised $200 million just last year, just on pure API security. It's interesting to notice that most of these companies are from Israel, which is a country really known for security. From entrepreneurs who were doing security companies, sold their companies, and now attacking the API security landscape. The API security is really key for these reasons, but also because the API management market has highly commoditized, and so the market needs to find products who generate more value.
All right, I'd like to go off on a bit of a tangent here, Mehdi, and talk about API as a product, because we're talking about API security, branching off to this standalone thing. Do you have any findings about API as a product in your trend this year?
Yeah, actually, it's the trend number 4 when we say API must be API now are part of in the infrastructure. It means that now there is an API to do most of the thing you want to do. There is people who already build software and expose it on an API for that. But it's true that the API product mindset, the API product idea and practice has pushed many people to invest into APIs, right? And to manage them, because it was actually the money maker. It was actually the product of the company. So you want to secure the value. So security is key. You want to manage the value. So management is key. And also, let's say many managers are having this product mindset, so that, and they understand that APIs are a way to build next generation of products. So this is why also the landscape is maturing, because now they want to control the full, what we call API lifecycle management. From the design, documentation, test, security, versioning, promotion, exposition, versioning at the end. The full lifecycle needs to be mastered, because it's the product, it's the thing that brings money in the company. It's not just a a technical tool that the IT teams use for saving some time or whatever. Now it's the core business. So you need an industry to supply the core business. And this is why the API as a product has really helped the API industry landscape to structure, but in all cases, actually, in all the cases.
Have we come to the point where APIs are, or the term API has slowly, reached the trend where we're talking about it as if regular people are already talking about it. Like, for example, regular people, non-developers are already talking about the cloud. They already know what the cloud is. Have we come to the point where we're at that level with APIs?
It's starting. Again, at the APIDays conferences we run, we've seen that over the last 5-6 years, many business people talking about APIs, even if they don't know how to use one or how to build one, or they understand the concept and the power behind it, but still it's not there yet. I'm still doing sometimes evangelization sessions to executive committees about APIs is not just a technical term. You should need to think in terms of business, whatever. So let's say it's growing, but it's definitely not done yet. More and more business people are adopting the word APIs and the mindset behind it, but definitely the top management is not there yet, and it's not spread across all departments. Even in the IT department, not every technician has the API mindset to understand why APIs are important for the business. APIs as a product, they still believe in API is just an interface to connect to applications, which it is, but it's not. In an open API economy, this is not only that, it has also business implications. So it's definitely not there yet. But I would say even the cloud, when you ask about the cloud, if you really ask people what is the cloud and what, there is less people that understand it than we think.
Yeah, and I think that your answer leads perfectly to my next question, and which is one of the trends that you actually found, and this is about the emergence of low-code development platforms and the birth of citizen developers. You said that it was triggered by the rise of these APIs. So what do you think is next in this space?
Yeah, it's true. The low-code and no-code aspect is really booming. I often take this example, like now we have no-code boot camps. We 10 years ago we had code boot camps, like 3 months to learn how to code approximately, and then to start as a programmer, and then you will learn along the way. Now we have no code bootcamp, right? So 3 months to learn how to no code or how to code with I don't know how to say it, but like your no coder or whatever. I don't know. But the
citizen
thing is,
developer,
yeah, citizen developer. But the thing is, yes, with a platform like Bubble, Notion, or Zapier, or who are able to enable like really the widgetification of the business. There is a widget, there is an app and integration, a snippet for everything that you connect this snippet together, and you are able to build quite interesting implications. Just to say, the no-code, low-code aspect has been there for 30 years. We tried to help people to do no-code, but it was never really able to achieve a certain point. Now it seems to achieve a point where companies make millions of dollars with no-code tools, right? They're able to bootstrap their first $1 million of revenue without even a line of code from their teams and without a developer in the team. And we even see developers adopting no-code tools, because when it's ready, why I would invest in code where I can do it with no code, so I can invest code time and bandwidth on something else. So the trend is really there. And also we see we lack of developers. So we see a lot of people who try to make a move in their careers. And with no code, you have a learning curve that is higher. Of course, at the end, there's things you cannot do with no code, but the learning curve to do something valuable is really, really fast. As a coder, you make maybe 6 months, 1 year to have a level of doing something valuable. With no code, it's few weeks, right, to do something really, really valuable that a coder would take 2-3 years to do, right? So that's really the first the idea behind what's happening. The second thing is that, yes, because of APIs and the proliferation of APIs, now there's an API for everything. As we said, there are really a layer of infrastructure for the whole digital world. And so now companies have understood that their end user is not always a developer. Their end user is probably business people, business manager, business product, or whatever. So let's say no code is just another way to expose your API. You can expose your APIs as REST or GraphQL, like really raw for developers. You can have SDKs, to help developers to integrate it better, right? But you can have embed code, right? So snippet of code that you can embed, everybody can embed to have. And so you can have widgets, right? So it's another way to expose your APIs to make it more consumable. And so I consider no code as a more abstract way than a widget, but a more abstract way to expose your APIs, to be able to share it with others, to mix it with other APIs, and to include it into, let's say, business environment. So I'd consider no code as a part of the developer experience, but it's a developer experience that is so abstract and so simple that it can even be a customer experience, not only a developer experience, but also a customer experience. So this is the trend, and we've seen companies like Zapier, we've seen Retool, we've seen AppSheet acquired by APIDays for $2 billion. Like all these companies in the no-code environment are really booming, and they're highly evaluated because they understand that I think we have 0.03% of the planet who is a developer, and we need like 20 times, 30 times more than that. So we will need more people to onboard, and this is the pitch they have, is that we lack 25, 30 million developers. So we definitely need to have tools for these people, and the next developers maybe not developers. They will be business people who understand how to mix things, Airtable, some stuff like that.
Yeah, I think I hope the next APIDays would sponsor these no code camps in the future.
And
anyway,
they will. And they will. At next APIDays Paris in December, we have a no code day, like a track about no code, a full day.
Excellent. Now, in your report, you analyzed each category of the API landscape. So, in your report, which category showed the biggest innovation or growth that you observed this year?
So the biggest innovation and growth is definitely what we call the API as a product or business process as a service. Mm-hmm. This is the trend number 4. This is really where we see most of the innovation, because it's quite decentralized innovation. Many entrepreneurs, they see a business process that is manual or still owned by Excel, or that is relying on old technologies, and say, okay, we should build an API for that. Take the example of some company like I recently see, like Impala. They try to do a full aggregator for hotels. Mm-hmm. Like hotels have issues to publish their data on the web. They only go to what we call a hospitality management system, which are owned by old players, which are expensive and not innovating. So they try to liberate hotels to be able to share their data anywhere. In fintech, in insurance, in healthcare, in supply chain. Again, many startups are evolving into API models, right? Mm-hmm. And in all type of industries, or every business process can be under an API, and this is where we see a lot of innovation. I've seen a background check APIs, to know if you need to hire someone. You can have APIs to make forms, like type forms and others. There is an API for everything. So the innovation and the growth mostly come from this business process as a service, and that actually make the really API economy digital infrastructure. When you think there is an API for that, it's because there is an entrepreneur who had this API mindset and build an API to do that. So this is where we see the most of innovation.
Yeah, and it's the most approachable too. I think. Like for someone who is not a developer, for them to discover APIs, that's gonna be their first jump off point into the world or landscape, so to speak.
Yeah, but this part, the API, when you have more APIs, actually you have more API tools to need to manage them. So that drives the landscape on one part, but that also drives the way you need to integrate them. So like Toro Cloud, but all the iPaaS, like the iPaaS also see some innovation. Some new iPaaS are coming because new APIs, more protocols, more designs and everything. You need to understand like the fragmentation. You need to orchestrate this now 10, 15, 100, 200 APIs you integrate in your system. So you need new ways to integrate and orchestrate what you integrate in your system with security, with coding really fast, all these different APIs who are different data formats and export formats and everything. So it also drives innovation into the integration platform as a service. And last but not least, the aggregation APIs. The people who say one APIs for all banks, or one APIs for all hotels, or one APIs for all hospitals, also is driven by these new APIs, because let's say the API is a product. Because at some point, the more you have, some people will want simplification. So they really want to be the one-stop shop for all APIs from a sector. So specification drives agglomeration. But in a few years, we may have too much agglomeration, and so we'll want to have specification again. And this is the history of software.
Yeah. So I'd like to wrap this conversation by asking you. I'm not sure if you really have a direct answer to this, because you've been working with APIs for years. But which finding or trend this year most surprised you and your team? What was the most surprising thing about, or trend about, the API landscape this year?
Of course, I have an answer to that question. I always have an answer to it. The thing is, no, for me, again, maybe biased, but the most surprising things I've seen is like the appearance of privacy concerns into API management. Right? I thought people will not care really about privacy in the next 5 years, and it will be only really later they will care about privacy. But we've seen the emergence of pure privacy gateways company who on top of API management, they don't do just security, they do also privacy, they check regulations. We've seen also companies who check data retentions. If the API you have access to something, to check the data actually is not obsolete because of a privacy regulation. And last but not least, in API security, you have what we call access management or access control management. And we've seen also some companies who help to do what we call purpose-based access management. So now it's not about like the technicality of does someone has an access to API? Does this app ID has these scopes to access the data they request? But no, now is that does this app has the legal right to access this data because the consent has been shared with the user, or to do. Just an example, you give your data for marketing purposes, just market communication purposes, right? Newsletter. But yes, someone in the CRM for sales say, okay, like I will pull this data from the database through API, to be able to have it in the CRM to have sales. But the consent has been done just for marketing, for communication, not for sales. So now we see gateways that analyze the purpose. Say, look, the CRM is not identified as let's say on the same purpose than the consent of the user. No, sorry, I give you an error. But so we see new type of errors in APIs, like the errors like 401 unauthorized or 403 forbidden. Now we see this type of errors because of a regulation or privacy concern that were not see that so much before. So it's actually surprising we see that earlier, right? And some companies like X8, for example, are doing some pure API privacy gateways and stuff like that, and so many others. So it's a trend that actually I was surprised to see early. I thought it was in a few years, but now we see that coming in the API space. Yes, with this and no code actually are the two surprise of the year, like privacy, so more regulation, more privacy check at the API level, because it's really the at the interface where everything happens, and people don't want to see that the database, they don't want to touch code in the app, they just want to see the flow, if the flow is going right, and also the no code aspect. Yes, and I will just share the last example. You're familiar with ETL, extract, transfer, load, technologies to move data. There's a company who is actually really surprising called Airbyte. They do an open source ETL that they are the huge community. They raised $180 million in less than 1 year. They're really booming. But the thing is, yes, I talked to their CEO recently. He told me, actually, when we have one issue right now, when we move data from one application to another, is checking if the regulation works. right? And so they look for people to do open source components on that. So yeah, definitely privacy for me is the surprise of the year. But no code is not a surprise, but it's really interesting to see how big it comes. It's surprising in a way that how big it
How
comes.
fast it is, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So interesting findings there, Mehdi. Before we wrap up, can you tell us where our listeners can fully read and appreciate your report? I think they'll find some more stuff in there. We just scratched the surface over here at Coding Over Cocktails. And of course, can you share with them where they can follow your activities and updates on API days and all that good stuff happening?
Yeah, so if you're interested about every API news and API conferences, so you can go on 2 websites. So APIDays.global for everything about conferences. I do a sum up of the and a quarterly update of the landscape every conference. So you will be able to see like some updates of the landscape at every conference, and you can attend to these. We're back in person this year, so that will be a lot of fun. You can go on APIscene.io, so APIscene.io. It's our media platform where we host the API landscape report that you will be able to download in full for free, right? And yes, if you're interested about data privacy, you can follow what I do on alias.dev, ALIAS.dev for if you're interested about API for privacy.
All right. Appreciate the time, Mehdi. Thank you very much for joining us for another round of Coding Over Cocktails.
Thank you very much, Kevin.
Hey listeners, thank you for joining us in this round of cocktails. Please like and subscribe to check out other episodes of this podcast series. We're also available on your favorite podcast platforms, or you can simply listen in at torocloud.com, where you'll find full episode transcripts and show notes. On behalf of the team here at Toro Cloud, thank you very much for listening to us today. This has been Kevin Montalvo for Coding Over Cocktails. Cheers!